My name's Tom, and I've been married to my wife, Sarah, for 20 years. We've been together for what feels like a lifetime. Since high school, actually. I was 17 when we started dating, and she was 18. She was a senior, and I was just a junior. I thought she was way out of my league back then, but for some reason, she took an interest in me. When Sarah went off to college, we did the whole long-distance thing for a couple of years. She was up at some fancy school while I was back home, finishing up high school and doing my first year at the local community college. It was tough, but we made it work, and eventually, I transferred to a college in the same city as hers. That's when things started getting serious between us. We moved in together, and a year after I graduated, we got married. It was the summer of '04, and I thought I had it all figured out. Our marriage has been pretty solid over the years. At least, that's what I thought. We built a nice life together, raised two great kids, and dealt with the usual ups and downs. But not too long ago, everything changed. I found out something that I just could not shake, and it has me rethinking everything about our life together. It all started right after Christmas. We had plans to meet up with some of Sarah's old friends from her college days. We had not seen them in years, so I figured it would be a nice evening of reminiscing and catching up. We all gathered at this cozy little restaurant downtown, ordered some food, and started talking about old times. At some point, Sarah mentioned that we met in high school just in passing. One of her old roommates, Jessica, jumped in and made a comment about how wild college was and how crazy it was that Sarah and I met in high school and ended up together after all those years. I laughed it off, trying to play along. I joked that I did not know if Sarah was as wild as I was back then, just trying to keep the conversation light. But then Jessica started telling a story, and right away, I could tell something was off. Sarah cut her off mid-sentence, saying she was uncomfortable talking about it. It was not like her to shut someone down like that, so I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. I had a gut feeling that something was wrong, and I just could not ignore it. So, I stepped in and said, actually, Sarah and I started dating in high school, and we were together the whole time she was in college. The room went quiet, and it was like all of her friends suddenly did not know what to say. The rest of the dinner was awkward, and I could not shake the feeling that something had happened back then that I did not know about. As we were leaving, another one of her old roommates, Lisa, pulled me aside. She looked me in the eye and said, "You really should have an honest conversation with Sarah about what happened in college." My heart sank, but I did not want to cause a scene, so I just nodded and walked out with Sarah. On the drive home, I asked Sarah straight up if there was something I needed to know about those years when we were long distance. She brushed it off, saying it was nothing important. I pressed her again, telling her it was really important for me to know the truth, but she just kept saying it did not matter and that it was all in the past. When we got home, I told her that I needed some space and that I was going to stay at my brother Mike's house until she was ready to talk about what really went down in college. The next day, she came over and finally broke down. She admitted to having slept with several other guys during the first 2 years of college while we were apart. She tried to explain that she did not think our relationship was serious back then, that it was just a high school fling that would not last. She said she never really thought it was a big deal because of the distance, and she was just having fun. But hearing that did not make it any easier. I asked her how many guys she had been with, and she said it was at least 10. Some of them were guys she even introduced me to when I visited on weekends. She kept in touch with at least one of them over the years, too. I felt like my whole world was crumbling. This was not just some fling or mistake. This was a pattern that went on for years. She had been living a double life, and I was completely in the dark. I told her right then and there that I wanted a divorce. I started the paperwork as soon as I could after the holidays. On January 2nd, I officially filed. I just could not see a way to move forward after learning what she had done. It felt like a betrayal on so many levels, and I knew I could never trust her the same way again. Of course, her family, and even some of my family think I am overreacting. They keep telling me that I should not throw away a 20-year marriage over a few mistakes made in the past. But to me, this was not just a mistake. This was years of infidelity and lies, and the fact that she introduced me to these guys as her friends when I was visiting, it just felt like a slap in the face. I felt humiliated and disrespected. We have 2 kids, 17 and 19, and they're old enough to understand what is going on. I believe they will get why I need to leave. I am not saying this is easy. It is probably the hardest thing I have ever done. But I just cannot stay in a marriage where trust has been shattered so completely. Am I wrong for leaving? Some days I feel like I am losing my mind with all the pressure from people telling me to just forgive and forget. But I keep thinking about all those years she lied to me and how I was living in some fantasy that she helped create. After I filed for divorce, everything felt like it was moving in slow motion. I was staying at my brother Mike's place, trying to wrap my head around everything that had happened. Mike, being the good brother that he is, was supportive but tried to keep things light. He's the kind of guy who believes that everything can be fixed with a cold beer and some time on the couch. But this was not the kind of problem that could just be patched up. Sarah was blowing up my phone, sending texts and leaving voicemails, asking me to come back home so we could talk things through. But I was not ready to face her. I needed time to process it all, to figure out what I was feeling. It was not just anger. I was hurt, confused, and questioning everything I thought I knew about our life together. How could she keep this from me for so long? How could she look me in the eyes all these years, knowing what she had done? A few days later, we sat down with the kids, Jackson and Lily, to break the news. That was one of the hardest conversations I have ever had. They knew something was off. They are not little kids anymore, and they could sense the tension. Jackson, our 19-year-old, took it pretty well, all things considered. He is a lot like me, quiet, keeps his feelings close to the chest. He nodded and said he understood, but I could see the disappointment in his eyes. Lily, who was 17, was not as calm. She got really upset, crying and asking why we could not just work it out. She kept saying she did not want her family to fall apart. It broke my heart to see her so hurt. I tried to explain that this was not just a simple disagreement or something we could just sweep under the rug. I told them that sometimes people make choices that cannot be undone and that trust, once broken, is hard to rebuild. Sarah was sitting there too, looking as devastated as I felt, and trying to comfort Lily, but it just felt like too little too late. Over the next few weeks, I was getting a lot of calls and messages from friends and family. Some of them were supportive, saying they understood why I was making the decision I was. Others, though, were not so understanding. My mom, for example, kept telling me that marriage is about forgiveness and that everyone makes mistakes. She reminded me about how my dad screwed up a few times and how they worked through it. But this felt different. This was not just one screw-up or a rough patch. This was years of deception. Even Sarah's parents reached out to me, which was awkward, to say the least. They are good people, and I have always had a good relationship with them, but it was clear they were trying to smooth things over. Sarah's dad, Jim, told me over the phone that he understood I was hurt, but that Sarah was really sorry, and that we should not let this ruin everything we had built together. He kept saying that the kids needed us to stay together, but in my mind, staying together just for the kids was not going to cut it. They deserve to see what a healthy, honest relationship looks like, not some patched-up version of a broken marriage. I wanted to work every day like nothing was wrong, but it was hard to keep my mind on the job. I work in construction, managing a small team of guys who look to me for direction. Normally, I am pretty good at keeping my personal life out of work, but this was different. I was distracted, snapping at people over little things, and just not myself. My buddy Rick, who has worked with me for years, pulled me aside one day and asked if I was okay. I told him a bit about what was going on, and he just shook his head, saying, "Man, that is rough. But you got to do what is right for you." That stuck with me, because that is really what it came down to, doing what was right for me, not what everyone else thought I should do. Meanwhile, Sarah was trying everything she could to get me to come home. She suggested counseling, saying we could work through it with a therapist. She promised she would do whatever it took to make things right. But I was not sure if therapy could fix this. It was not about punishing her or making her suffer for what she did. It was about the fact that I just did not see a future for us anymore. The trust was gone. And without that, what kind of marriage would we have? One night, I went back to the house to pick up some of my things. Sarah was there, and it was the first time we were alone together since I found out the truth. She looked like she had not slept in days, and honestly, I probably did not look much better. She tried to talk to me again, saying she loved me and that she never meant to hurt me. She kept apologizing, saying she was young and stupid back then, and that it was all a huge mistake. I could see she was genuinely sorry, but it did not change the fact that she had kept this secret for so long. As I was packing up, she asked if I would at least consider going to one counseling session, just to talk things through with a professional. I told her I would think about it, and that was the truth. I was not trying to give her false hope, but I also did not want to make any rash decisions while I was still so angry. I did end up agreeing to go to one session, mostly for closure than anything else. We met with a therapist named Dr. Mitchell, who was kind and seemed to know what she was doing. She listened as we both talked about our sides of the story. Sarah cried a lot, and I mostly just sat there feeling numb. Dr. Mitchell asked some tough questions, and there were moments when I thought maybe, just maybe, we could figure something out. But every time I tried to imagine moving past this, I felt this wall come up inside me. I could not picture myself ever feeling the same way about Sarah again. I could not picture trusting her with my heart like I once did. After the session, Dr. Mitchell suggested that we take some time apart to really think about what we wanted. She said that healing from something like this would not happen overnight, and that if we both wanted it, there was a possibility of rebuilding. But she also said it was okay if that was not what we wanted, and that gave me a bit of relief. I did not have to force myself to fix something that felt beyond repair. Sarah and I drove home separately after that session. I went back to Mike's place and spent the night tossing and turning, replaying everything that had happened. I knew in my gut that the marriage was over for me, but saying it out loud and making it real was a whole other step I had to take. It is strange, 20 years of marriage, 2 kids, and a whole life built together, and yet here I was feeling like I was back at square one, starting over from scratch. Over the next few weeks, I focused on getting my own place and moving forward with the divorce. I talked to a lawyer, started sorting out the paperwork, and tried to get used to the idea of being on my own. It was not easy, and I would be lying if I said there were not moments when I wondered if I was doing the right thing. But every time I thought about staying, I remembered the look on Sarah's face when she finally admitted what she had done, and I knew I could not go back to that. After I made up my mind about the divorce, things started to move quickly. I found a small apartment not too far from where our old house was. Nothing fancy, just a place to call my own while I figured out what was next. It felt strange to be setting up a new place alone after spending so many years building a home with Sarah. The first night in the new apartment, I sat on the floor eating takeout, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes, and just stared at the walls. It was the quiet that got to me. After 20 years of sharing my life with someone, the silence was deafening. Jackson and Lily were trying to adjust too. Jackson was off at college, so he was not around much, but Lily still had another year of high school. She split her time between Sarah's place and mine, but it was clear she was struggling with the new reality. She would come over, and we would watch movies or cook dinner together, but there was this distance between us that had never been there before. I tried to be patient and give her space, but it was tough. I wanted to be there for her, to help her through this, but I was also dealing with my own pain. It is not easy being a dad when you're still trying to figure out how to be okay yourself. Sarah and I kept things civil for the most part, especially when it came to the kids. We both agreed that whatever was going on between us should not affect them more than it already had. We worked out a schedule for Lily, and we communicated mostly through texts or quick calls, sticking to the basics, school events, doctor appointments, that sort of thing. I could tell she was trying hard to respect my boundaries, and I appreciated that, even if it did not make things any easier. One evening, I got a call from my mom. She has always been the kind of person who believes that everything happens for a reason, but I could hear the concern in her voice. She asked me how I was holding up and if there was anything she could do to help. I told her I was fine, just taking things one day at a time. But she did not buy it. She never does. She said, "Tom, it is okay to not be okay, you know? You do not have to pretend you have it all figured out." Hearing her say that hit me harder than I expected. I realized I had been putting on a brave face for everyone around me, trying to act like I was in control when really, I felt like I was drowning. I thanked her and promised I would come over for dinner soon. After we hung up, I just sat there thinking about everything I had lost and everything I still had to figure out. It was overwhelming, but I knew I could not just wallow in it forever. Work became my escape. I threw myself into my job, taking on extra projects and working long hours just to keep my mind off things. Rick, my coworker and good friend, noticed how much I was pushing myself and kept checking in on me. He is the kind of guy who does not say much, but he is always there when you need him. One day, he invited me out for a drink after work. We ended up at a local bar, and after a few beers, I started opening up about everything. I told him about the divorce, the lies, and how I just felt lost. Rick listened without interrupting, just nodding along. When I finally stopped talking, he looked at me and said, "Man, you are stronger than you think. You got through 20 years of marriage, raised 2 kids, and now you are dealing with all this. You are still standing, right? That says a lot." It was not some life-changing revelation, but it was what I needed to hear in that moment. I realized I had been so focused on what I had lost that I had not given myself any credit for just getting through it. Meanwhile, Sarah was doing her own thing, trying to make amends in her own way. She started seeing a therapist on her own, and I heard through the grapevine that she had joined a support group for people dealing with infidelity and the fallout of broken marriages. Part of me respected her for that. She was trying to better herself and understand her actions. But another part of me felt like it was too little, too late. I was glad she was working on herself, but I could not help but think that none of this would have been necessary if she had been honest from the start. One day, she reached out and asked if we could meet up to talk. I was hesitant, but I agreed. We met at a small cafe we used to go to when we were younger, back when things were simple. It felt strange to be sitting across from her, just the two of us without the safety net of our kids or the structure of a counseling session. She started by apologizing again, not just for what she had done back then, but for how she handled everything since. She admitted that she had been scared, that she did not know how to come clean about her past without losing me. So she just buried it and hoped it would never come up. She said she regretted how much pain she caused, not just to me, but to our kids as well. I listened, trying to keep my emotions in check. It was clear she was being sincere, and I appreciated her honesty, but I was still guarded. After she finished, she asked me if I thought there was any chance we could start over, not as husband and wife, but as friends or at least as people who could co-parent without all the tension. I took a deep breath and told her that I was willing to try for the kids' sake, but I needed time. I was not ready to jump back into a friendship or anything close to that. I needed to heal first. We left things on that note, a sort of tentative truce. It was not perfect, but it was a step in the right direction. Over the next few weeks, I focused on rebuilding my own life. I started going to the gym more, trying to get back into shape. I reconnected with some old friends I had lost touch with over the years. I even took up fishing again, something I used to love but had not done in ages. It was not about finding distractions. It was about finding myself again. I also spent a lot of time with Jackson and Lily, trying to make sure they knew that even though things were changing, I was still there for them. Jackson came home one weekend, and we spent a whole afternoon working on his car together. It was one of those simple, quiet moments that just felt right. Lily and I went on a few hikes, something we both enjoy, and it gave us a chance to talk about everything going on. She was still hurting, but I could see her starting to accept the new normal. As the divorce proceedings continued, Sarah and I managed to keep things respectful. We split our assets, worked out the details of custody with Lily, and tried to make the process as painless as possible. There were no major fights, no dramatic courtroom battles, just two people trying to do the best they could in a tough situation. When the divorce was finally finalized, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief, sadness, hope. It was all there, tangled up together. I knew the road ahead would not be easy, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could see a light at the end of the tunnel. I was starting to understand that while the life I had known was over, it did not mean my life was over. There was still so much ahead of me, so much to look forward to. As the dust settled from the divorce, I found myself in uncharted territory. For the first time in 2 decades, I was on my own, navigating a life that no longer revolved around being a husband. It was strange, but in a way, it was also liberating. I realized that I had the opportunity to redefine who I was outside of my marriage, outside of my role as a father. And just as me, Tom, the first few months were a mix of good days and bad. Some days, I would wake up feeling optimistic, ready to take on whatever life threw at me. Other days, I felt like I was carrying the weight of the world on my shoulders. But I kept pushing forward, one step at a time. I focused on making my apartment feel more like home, hanging up pictures of Jackson and Lily, putting up a few mementos from my old life that still meant something to me. It was not perfect, but it was mine. One of the biggest changes came when I decided to try something completely out of my comfort zone. I signed up for a woodworking class at the local community center. It was something I had always been curious about, but never had the time or the courage to pursue. Walking into that class on the first day felt like being the new kid at school again, but I was determined to give it a shot. There was something soothing about working with my hands, shaping rough pieces of wood into something tangible and useful. It gave me a sense of accomplishment that I had not felt in a long time. Meanwhile, my relationship with Sarah continued to evolve. We were not friends, exactly, but we were civil and even supportive when it came to the kids. We attended Lily's school events together, and Jackson's college graduation was on the horizon. We had our ups and downs, but we both understood that our children's well-being came first. There were moments when I caught a glimpse of the Sarah I had fallen in love with all those years ago, and it reminded me that, despite everything, we had shared some good times. I did not hate her. I just could not be married to her anymore. The turning point for me came during one of my solo fishing trips. It was a crisp fall morning, and the lake was calm and quiet. I sat there with my line in the water, enjoying the stillness. As I watched the sun rise, I felt a wave of peace wash over me. For the first time since everything had happened, I realized that I was not just surviving, I was actually okay. I was learning to live with the past without letting it define my future. Around that time, I reconnected with an old friend, Claire, from high school. We had not seen each other in years, but she reached out after hearing about my divorce. She had gone through a similar situation and thought it might be good for us to catch up. We met for coffee, and what was meant to be a quick chat turned into hours of reminiscing and sharing stories about our lives. It was refreshing to talk to someone who understood what I was going through, not because she had read about it or heard secondhand, but because she had lived it. Claire and I started hanging out more regularly, no pressure, just two friends catching up on lost time. We went hiking, caught a few movies, and even tackled a couple of DIY projects around my apartment. She was kind, funny, and most importantly, she made me feel like myself again. I was not looking for anything serious, and neither was she, but it was nice to have someone in my corner who got it. Jackson and Lily noticed the change in me. Jackson said I seemed lighter, more like my old self, and Lily mentioned that she was glad I was finding things to smile about again. It meant the world to me to know that they were rooting for me, even as they were dealing with their own adjustments to the new family dynamic. Jackson was gearing up for his final exams at college, and Lily was busy with her senior year activities. I made sure to be as present as I could be, showing up for every game, recital, and parent-teacher meeting. I wanted them to know that, no matter what, I would always be there for them. One evening, Sarah and I met up to go over some last-minute details for Lily's upcoming graduation party. We were sitting on the back porch of the house we used to share, watching the sunset. It was one of those quiet, reflective moments where everything just felt still. Sarah turned to me and said, "You seem happy, Tom." "I am really glad." I nodded and said, "I am getting there, and I hope you are too." It was not a grand, movie-worthy reconciliation, but it was honest. For the first time, I felt like we were on the same page, not as husband and wife, but as two people who had shared a life and were now learning to move on from it. The graduation party went off without a hitch. Jackson was there, helping out with the setup, and Lily was beaming with excitement. All of our friends and family showed up, and for a few hours, it felt like the old days where everything was easy and carefree. Sarah and I stood together, watching as Lily gave her graduation speech, and for a moment, I could see the pride in her eyes. We had done this. No matter how things ended between us, we had raised two incredible kids, and that was something we would always share. As the night wound down, Claire stopped by to say hello. Sarah noticed and gave me a knowing smile, but she did not say anything. It was like an unspoken acknowledgement that we were both finding our way, in our own time and in our own ways. Claire and I made plans to grab dinner later that week, and as we said our goodbyes, I felt a sense of calm settle over me. I did not have all the answers, and I knew there would still be tough days ahead, but I was okay with that. Life is messy, and people are flawed, but that does not mean we cannot find our way to something good again. I looked at Jackson and Lily, surrounded by friends and family, and I felt a swell of gratitude. I was proud of the man I was becoming, proud of the father I was to my kids, and even, in a strange way, proud of how Sarah and I had handled the end of our marriage. As I drove home that night, I rolled down the windows and let the cool night air wash over me. I did not know what the future held, But for the first time in a long time, I was not afraid of it. I was ready to face whatever came next, knowing that I had come through the storm and found myself on the other side. And that, I realized, was more than enough.